When I was young, my grandmother owned a very old rustic country summer home in a small village about 3 hours away from a large city where I grew up. There was nothing particularly threatening about the outside of the house. To a casual onlooker, it just looked like an old quaint house, much like the majority of the houses in the village. During summer break from school, my parents would send me there, since my grandmother always took her vacations there, far away from the busy life in the big city where we all lived. Though I miss my parents a lot, and didn't get along well with my grandmother, I still, for the most part, enjoyed the large garden with its old apple trees, a berry orchard, and a large vegetable garden. The inside of the house had a very different feel to it. First of all, it was definitely very old and somewhat musty, because it went unused for a large portion of the year. In one of the bedrooms where the wallpapers was peeling, you could see several layers of different color wallpaper, which makes me think that the house was owned by many people before my grandmother, though she had for many, many years. Though it had a sink, it did not have a toilet or a shower. Instead, there was an outhouse outside and an outside shower for summer use. There was one room in the house, which was added sometime after the original house was built. It was a slightly newer, open space with many windows, painted in a pleasant pastel color. It was located at the very back of the house. For some reason, my grandmother insisted that this particular room is where I would stay. If you were to simply look at it, you would find absolutely nothing threatening about this room. However, for some reason, I was terrified of staying there. My parents always remarked that unlike the other children, I was scared of nothing. I always slept with the lights off, never had any incidents where I was scared to be alone, and never had any childlike fears such as a monster in the closet, etc. So, my parents found it highly unusual that being 8 or 9 years old, I was absolutely terrified of this room. I would beg my grandmother to let me sleep in the bedroom in the main part of the house, but she always told me that I was being silly and there was absolutely nothing wrong with the room. Yet at night, with the lights off, I couldn't help but hear unusual creaking sounds, knockings, and what sounded like footsteps after my grandmother had gone to bed. Having never been scared of anything, I would pull the blanket almost all the way over myself, except for my eyes, out of which I could see faint black shadows moving along the corners of the room. I tried so hard to convince myself that I was just imagining things, but the extreme uneasy feeling never let up. I felt like something in the room could physically hurt me if it chose to. I told my parents and kept asking my grandmother about the room, but my questions were sidestepped, and I was always told that I'm just imagining things. And maybe it's because the room is sort of isolated from the rest of the house, and that makes me nervous. And of course, I got the usual explanation of it's just the house settling, etc. Since the house had no hot water, they couldn't blame the water heater. Things would go on like this every summer I was there. On a few occasions when I was allowed to sleep in the bedroom in the main part of the house, I felt much more at ease and was able to fall asleep much easier. In the other room, the uneasy feeling would keep me awake for hours, which was highly unusual for me since I never had trouble sleeping anywhere else. Yet, though significantly weaker, the effects of that negative energy permeated the entire house. To wash up before bed, we would heat water in the kitchen and put it in a basin. On numerous occasions, when I was washing my face or giving myself a sponge bath, since the only shower was outside, I had very strong feelings of being watched, to the point where I would do what I needed to do as fast as possible and would turn to look behind me, expecting someone to be there. One particular occasion I remember very clearly. It was broad daylight, and my grandmother went to the local market to buy food while leaving me at the house by myself. I was about to go outside to the garden when I heard a loud female voice clearly calling my name from the living room. Utterly confused, since I was supposed to be the only one in the house, I went to investigate. My grandmother was still out, and I confirmed that I was alone. Then I heard the same voice again, calling out to me urgently from another room. I was really freaked out and almost ran out of the house, but made myself go and see if anyone was there. I saw no one. When my grandmother got back from the market, I told her what happened, and she told me many people imagine someone calling their name when they are home by themselves. Even then, I thought it was an odd explanation, since I never had an occurrence like that before. And actually, I haven't had an occurrence like that in the nearly 20 years since then. Sadly, since I was still a child, I never found out the history of the house before my grandmother finally sold it after she was too old to maintain it. I don't envy whoever owns it now, though. Okay, one of my first experiences with ghosts was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was in Texas at my grandmother's house with my brother and cousin. We were sleeping in the living room, and I heard kids playing in the background. Then I heard a man call my name. I thought everyone else was up, and my grandma was waking me up. I stood up and opened my eyes, and there was no one there. It was also silent. I thought it was a dream, but then I heard kids again, and a man's voice started to call my name again. I now knew that this wasn't a dream. I ran to my grandparents' room and told them there was a man calling my name and that there were kids playing. My grandma said I was having a nightmare and to go back to sleep. I got into bed with them and went to sleep. About an hour later, my cousin came into the room, saying that a man wouldn't stop calling his name. My grandma thought it was maybe a coincidence and told us to go to sleep. Nothing ever happened to my brother. A few weeks later, we got a call from them, telling us that they were moving. My grandpa had gotten up about 1 a.m. to let the dog outside, and when he turned around, all of the dog's squeaky toys started squeaking, and there was a woman standing right in front of him, and it wasn't my grandma. They found a house and started moving as quickly as possible. We came down to help them. We lived in Oklahoma at the time, and my grandma told us that there was a family that lived in the house, and the dad and kids all died in the house fire. We never found out who the woman was, though. Thank you for letting me submit my story to you. This is one of the scariest, but I have lots of them. For as long as I can remember, I've been able to feel and see spirits that no one else could. It took me many years to discover what this ability was, and that I wasn't alone. I don't remember my very first ghostly experience very well, but my mother does. She told me the story many times. I was 3 years old, and we were visiting my grandmother at her home in East Boston. I walked into the back bedroom, my grandmother's room, and then back into the dining room and asked my grandmother about the man in our room. She asked me to describe him, so I did. She turned to my mother and quietly said, "She has a gift." She handed me a photo of her and my deceased grandfather and asked me if that was the man. I said yes, but he was skinnier now. My grandfather died of a brain aneurysm, a complication from a bout of meningitis in 1952, 34 years before my birth year. 1 year later, I was 4. We moved into a new home. Directly behind the house was the cemetery. We lived in that house for the next 14 years. There was a very heavy, eerie feeling that surrounded the stairs. Something watched you from the base of the stairs while you were in the living room, or at the top of the stairs. Every so often, there was footsteps and the sounds of someone falling down them. When you went to investigate, nothing was there. The basement was the worst place. It felt like something like a voice grip was squeezing your chest. I could never go down there. I was apparently the only one that felt it. My sister told me after she moved into her room down there that she never quite felt alone, and she'd get this odd headache, then smell something really awful. My dad made sure everything was perfectly safe before she moved everything down. There was no explainable reason for her experiences. I've had experiences outside the house as well, in cemeteries, in other people's homes. Recently, I began to investigate haunted places in New England with my friends. Since moving into my current residence in 2005, though, I haven't had any experiences at my home. We lived in a small farmhouse with a huge backyard, and beyond the fence, an even larger pasture. I was 11 years old when we lived there, and we, the kids, would always explore the backyard, especially at night, and play hide and seek all of the time. One night, in this big backyard, I was alone and looking out at the pasture when suddenly I felt as though I was being watched, and I turned my head to look at the house when I saw a transparent man looking at me, and then he disappeared a few seconds later. My uncle had died when I was 4, so I assumed it was him watching over me, and ventured into the house and went to sleep. A few minutes went by with no strange happenings when I went over to a friend's house and spent the night with her. We had a little bit of a slumber party and ended up sleeping in the living room when she woke me up at about 3 a.m. in the morning, apparently scared out of her mind, and told me she had woken up to go to the bathroom. That made her hair stand on end. Then saw a shadowy tall figure of a man with a pressed suit on, no hands or feet, and some kind of burlap bag over his head with a rope tied twice around his neck. So naturally, I thought she was kidding around, trying to scare me, so I got up and ventured into the direction she was pointing, when I felt this strange sensation, and boom, like magic, he was there. I ran back and told her that I had too seen it, and she ran into her parents' room and got them out of bed, and naturally, they told us there were no such things as ghosts, and told us to go back to sleep. We lay in the living room a long time, just watching this thing pace back and forth, and waiting for dawn so we could finally get some sleep. And about 5 in the morning, the visitor disappeared, and we soon fell asleep. Never in a million years, if someone would have told me this would be the beginning of a 19-year-old haunting, would I have believed them. But that is exactly what happened. Not just to me, but to my friend also. It seemed that this ghost visited us every night at the same time for almost 2 years at first, just pacing the halls, then turning things off and on, changing TV channels and radio stations, swinging things in the walls, just little annoying things that at our age would scare the crap out of you. One of the scariest nights I can remember was one night at my house. We were sitting on the bed eating ice cream when we both got that spooky feeling and fell silent, and we smelled something burning for a second, and then we heard the most guttural scary movie growl I've ever heard in my life. We threw our bowls and ran into the living room, where I felt the need to spoil the beans to my parents. Of course, they told me we were crazy and that our imaginations were great. A few months later, I was still insisting to them that something evil was in the home, and they kept telling me the same thing and began asking me if I needed help like counseling or something, but I kept fighting with them about it. By this point, even my brothers thought I was insane. A few months later, my parents decided to move because I stuck to my story, and they were hoping that if they got me away from my friend, that my imagination wouldn't work overtime. We moved about 65 miles from that town to another farmhouse that was even older than the last one. The same thing was happening, only instead of pacing back and forth, the figure began to float to my bedside, lean its head to the side, and make noises like it wanted something from me. This was a nightly ordeal for a few months, and then it began to start touching me. I could never see its hands, but I could feel the icy cold prickle sensation that came with it, working its way up my bed, to my legs, up my body, and even surrounding my head. Most nights, I was too afraid to move and afraid to cry out, so I laid in my bed, silently weeping. This went on for quite some time too. Then it began to lay in the bed beside me and touch me off and on all night, as though it was testing me to see if I was scared. And trust me, I was terrified. But when 5 a.m. rolled around, proof he would vanish. After a few months of this, in a tunnel of sleep, I finally got the nerve up to throw a pillow at him and yell at him. You know, things like, "What do you want from me?" And he began to put his head to the side, even more, and grunt, as if he was replying, "What?" Remember, the figure always had a pressed-on pinstripe suit and some kind of burlap bag over his head, with a rope that showed to be strung around his neck at least 2 times. So, I never saw a face or even heard him speak, anything other than the grunts it was doing that night. But shortly after my temper tantrum, it left. Finally, a few nights of peaceful sleep, until I was awakened by heavy footsteps in the foyer, going through the kitchen, which was not like him at all, and then the burnt smell again, and I was so afraid that I would hear the growl again, that I remembered thinking, my parents would surely find me dead in the morning from a heart attack. To make a long story shorter, here's a list of things that happened. After that night, I never saw the burlap ghost again, but strange things and sounds and figures would keep me up all night. It was like an open portal in my bedroom. I would wake up scratched up, heavy breathing in my ears, pressure on my chest, racing black silvery balls across the ceiling, red eyes racing through my room and disappearing, laughter, waking with my arms bruised as if someone had grabbed me, something cold that I always assumed to be a hand, because I felt something like a huge ring hit the bottom of my foot, grabbed me by the ankle, and almost slung me out of bed. A Bible was slung across the room and landed on my bed, as I had taken to the habit of filling my room with religious items. And one night, so much activity in my room that my younger brother was awakened and came in only to turn white and started screaming. And to this day, he will not tell me what he saw. So on to the future. I turned 18, still struggling with this haunting, or whatever you call it, and joined the military, and it still followed me. Even being stationed in Iceland, it was still up to no good, and my best friend, who was also my roommate, would say things like something is not right, and it was doing all of its little tricks again, like turning things on and off. But she seemed fascinated with it, so I told her the entire story, and she didn't seem to mind. She had just wondered what I had done to have this happen to me. Finally, A few years of peace without one thing happening. I'm now 24 and live with my boyfriend in our 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. And nothing. Another year of peace when he tells me one morning that he felt like he was being choked in the middle of the night and he has some bruises on his arm. I say nothing because I don't want him to think I am crazy, but it keeps happening, and then I wake up, look at the clock, and it's 3 a.m. again, and something is breathing heavy in my ear. I got up and went into our guest bedroom, and nothing, so I fall asleep for what seems like a few hours. But when I wake up, it is only 40 past 3, so I attempt to get up, and I can't move. Something is strangling me and hitting me all over. I struggle to get up, but I can't move. I can't even scream. This went on for about 15 to 20 minutes and proved the struggle is over. This time, the attack is so severe that I consider calling a team of specialists out to see what it is, but I never did. Shortly after that, my boyfriend and I split up, and I moved to Oklahoma to be with my family, and nothing has happened since. Once in a while, I get a strange sensation, but I don't think about it twice and just keep doing what I'm doing. It has now been about 2 years since anything out of the ordinary happened. There are many more things that happened during this trying period of my life, but for me to write it on here would take a year at least. For those of you who read this and think I'm crazy, I can only say that maybe someday my little brother will tell me what he saw. My fiance had just died in our townhouse. This was in 2002. He had offed himself in the head. I went back later because I couldn't go back there for a while after he had died. Anyway, I went back and I kept feeling hand brush across my forehead. One night, I was in bed and was about to fall asleep when something grabbed my foot and was pulling it downward. I freaked out. I was the only one in the house. Then, I had a friend come over because I was afraid to be alone because of these things happening. My friend was downstairs and I was upstairs, coming out of the bathroom, and a dark floating figure floated right by me. It almost ran into me and would have had I not stepped back. It telepathically told me it was not here for me and that I had gotten what it wanted, and also will not look directly at me. I somehow felt like I was being protected by God, and the thing was actually afraid of me. I didn't feel scared. Later on in the month, I took a bunch of pictures of the townhouse because I wanted to remember the good times where my fiance had lived and been very happy together at one time. I was planning on moving because the memory of his death was just too much for me, and I always had this creepy feeling there since he had died. After I got the pictures developed, there were 120 photos in all of several different rolls of film of different things, and then the one that I had taken pictures of, the inside of the townhome. Out of all these photos, I had taken 3 of the exact place where he had died, and only those 3 photos were what appeared to be flames right in the place where he had passed. It almost looked like the portal to hell. Seriously, to this day, I cannot explain those pictures. They were taken with a very expensive camera. No other photos I had developed before or after that had ever had those flames in them like that. Just the 3 that were the exact location of his body when he died. My name is Malin, and I've just turned 21. I live in Sweden. In my parents' house, I've experienced some strange things that I really can't explain. My sister and I have always felt that there is a presence other than us. My parents don't believe in that kind of thing and have always told us that it's just our imagination. One of the first things I remember is that my father had gotten this stuffed animal that looked like E.T. He got it from his students as a present. I must have been about 4 years old and had recently seen the movie with my sister, and for some reason, I thought that E.T. was the most scary thing I've ever seen, so I didn't like this doll at all. In our basement, there are a lot of different rooms. In one of them, we had a huge box filled with stuffed animals. Every time I went down there, I took the E.T. doll and put it in the bottom of the box, under all the other stuffed animals. But the next time I went down there, the E.T. doll was lying on top of the others again. This happened repeatedly, every time I went down there. It didn't matter if I waited 2 days or 2 minutes. I of course asked my sister and my parents about it, but they swore that they had nothing to do with it. Of course it could be so that they lied to me every time I asked them, but I find that hard to believe. Anyway, I solved the problem a couple years later by giving the E.T. doll to one of the guys in my class. I constantly heard, and still hear, cracks and other sounds in their house, footsteps, and sometimes voices. They've always been there, and I guess I got used to it, but it took a few years before the next big thing happened. I was 15, maybe 16, and had moved down to the bedroom downstairs. I didn't like sleeping downstairs, but it was either that or a tiny room upstairs. One day, I was sitting in my bed, writing in my diary, when I heard a knock on my door. I was surprised because I was alone in the house and hadn't heard either the car nor the door open. I said, "Come in," but when no one entered, I got up and opened the door, but there was no one there. I thought it was strange, but went back to my diary. I had hardly any time to pick up my pen before I heard another knock. This happened a couple times and really scared me, so I locked the door and crawled under the covers. Then I heard scratching outside and froze, just to hear meow, one of my cats. At first I thought it was my cat who had caused the knocking, but I've never met a cat that can actually knock that hard. Another time I was in the bathroom upstairs. I just finished washing my hands and was outside the bathroom when I remembered that I left my watch on the shelf in front of the mirror. I turned to go get it and took a step into the room when a bottle of lotion literally flew off the windowsill and landed in front of my feet. The window was closed and there was no wind to speak of outside. If the bottle had fallen off the windowsill because it was placed unstable, it would have fallen right down in the cat's litter box, but instead, it flew almost 13 feet. I calmly went out of there, closed the door, and got into my room and locked the door. I've also seen a boy in the basement, a teenager. He's not transparent at all. He looks as real as you and me. I've only gotten short glimpses of him, but I know he has brown hair and a green shirt. For some reason, I most often see him around Christmas and other holidays. I wonder why. Even though some of these things scare me, I've never felt threatened, so I guess whomever or whatever is present in my parents' house doesn't want to harm us. I'm one to be afraid of the dark, but there are feelings I get. Feelings that tell me to get out. Almost a communication from my location. The basement has been home to incidents experienced by me and my slightly older sister. My experience is weird. I went downstairs to retrieve something for my mom, when I was near the stairs, an opaque dark shade of gray temporarily blinded me. Whilst running up the stairs and wiping my eyes, I swore I heard something. My sister heard something too. She was on the downstairs computer once. It had basic features. She swore she heard something whisper something close to her name. My sister sprinted upstairs as well. Finally, my parents' room. I come in on rare occasions, like when the light and TV is on, or when my mom or dad are watching a good movie. My room is on the other end of the hall. I need to pass my parents' room. When I pass their room, I see strange things at the end of the bed. I see dark, almost impish figures. Once, I could have sworn I've seen red eyes. Now, for the sound, it is very creepy, yet inconclusive. I have no idea what the sound actually is. Once, when the family and I were in the living room, I heard a broom sweep in the back of the house. Weird part, there was no broom in the back of the house. Plus, just today, on 3/20/2008, I heard something in my room exhale. I know it wasn't me. That had freaked me out. The feeling. I think I may actually have been touched too. Once, when I was 8 or 9, I was watching a show on urban legends. I felt something run something gently down my back. It was around 10 or 11, but I got up anyway, and I went to the living room where I found my mom. I told her what happened, but she just said it was just a curtain. I lived in a home in North Salt Lake City that my children and myself had many experiences over the years that we never could explain other than supernatural. My husband, myself, and 2 children lived in this house for over 12 years. There's a family that now lives in the house, and I do not want them to cause any problems by giving them out the address of the house. I will say that the house is located on 5th North. My children attended Jackson Elementary School when they were young and graduated from West High School. My daughter was sleeping and thought she heard her name being called, and when she opened her eyes, there was a man with a beard sitting in a rocking chair, holding a hat in his lap. My daughter's bed was hung from the ceiling with chains, and her bed was 4 feet from the floor. My daughter said the man turned his head towards her and grinned at her. She also said that her rocking chair was even with her bed and was 4 feet off the floor. She told me she pulled the covers over her head, and when she peeked out over the covers, he was gone. My son told me of a man with a beard and a top hat sat on the end of the bed. My son heard his name called, and when he even looked in the direction of the speaker, the man sitting on his bed, the man grinned at him. My son pulled the covers over his head, and when he looked out, the man was gone. I was alone in the house for a few days, and on 2 different nights, I was awoken to the sound of music, violin, and tinky sounding piano. The lights were on in the kitchen and the front room. As I entered the kitchen from my bedroom, the music stopped and the lights dimmed, and as I entered the front room, the lights dimmed, and I found myself standing in the middle of the front room in the dark. I heard footsteps in the stairwell, and when I got to the bottom of the stairs, the lights were on upstairs. I started walking up the stairs, and with each step, the light got dimmer, and about at the 5th step, it was now dark upstairs. I could write about many other things that happened at this house. We never felt anything evil with our experiences, and it was always our own fear that scared us. I believe the house I grew up in was haunted. My family all makes jokes about how it was just all my imagination. There were several different occurrences throughout my childhood, nothing on a regular basis, but frequent enough for me to believe that something paranormal was going on there. I lived in this house from birth until 18 years old. I'm now much older, and I still believe what I saw and felt was real and inexplainable. As a child, I always woke up in the night to get a drink of water or a snack even sometimes. I wasn't overweight, but it was a running joke in my house that I always had to get up to get something to eat at night. On several of these occasions, I would walk out of my bedroom down the short hall and into the living room where we had one of those old TVs that when you turned them off, the colors would dance for a short while and then go out. My parents were early to bed, early to rise, so I know the TV couldn't just shut off. But I would go out, and there would be a human face made from those colors that actually would just swim around when it was shut off. I watched the TV during the day, and it shut off, and always watched to see what the colors did, but they never made the face during the day, only at night, after the TV had been off for hours. The second occurrence that freaked me out completely was on one night. I was standing at the refrigerator, which was on the same wall as the doorway that led down to a small landing, which is where the back door was, and the stairs to the basement were. I always felt watched downstairs, and couldn't stand going down there at night, even with all the lights on. I could do it fine during the day, but at night, it freaked me out. Anyway, the night I'm speaking of, I turned my head to the doorway. The only illumination was the light from the refrigerator, and there was a fully formed person peering around the corner from the side that would have been coming up the stairs. The horrible thing about it was that at first, I thought it was my stepdad, but then I got a look at his face a little closer, and it was his face, but almost evil looking. I swear it had red eyes, but that could have been a misinterpretation of what I saw. I ran back down to see where all the bedrooms were, and I peeked in my parents' room, and he was still in bed. I've never found an explanation of why it could have been his likeness, but I know it was definitely scary. Did I put you to sleep? Do you want to wake up now? Or maybe you're just coming across this video for the first time. Whatever the case, please comment below and let me know which story you love the most. Also, it's really a nice way to let me know that you are engaged in the video and you watched it, and it helps get this video out to as many people as possible. So, even by doing something like commenting, liking, and sharing the video, it goes a long way. Why am I talking like I'm so excited or acting? I don't know, I'm just enthusiastic right now. I tried my best to get 40 minutes out to you guys, and well, I almost succeeded, but I still failed because it's less than 40 minutes, darn it. But I was really excited for you guys to have this video. I'm gonna go now because there's really not much more I can say, but please, in the comment section below, just write something, just let me know you're alive, let me know how you're doing, and let's have this distraction distract us for a while, whatever that means. But guys, seriously, love you so much. Please remember to share the video, it really helps, it does, not exaggerating at all, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you, and I'll see you in the next, oh wait, I already said that. Okay, bye.